1055 with your host, Richard Rose.
Hey, good morning. I'm Richard Rose. Welcome to Exit 1055 Long Island. This is your TV 1055 show about all things Long Island. In a few moments, how the solar eclipse had so many youngsters thinking like scientists. But we begin with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's decision this past week to sue the Environmental Protection Agency for allowing the dumping of dredged sludge gathered mostly from Connecticut's shoreline into the middle of the Long Island Sound, bordering Long Island's waters. The two states have long battled over this issue for many years now. Harbors on both sides of the Long Island Sound must be routinely dredged by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And for years, the sludge, about 80% of it from Connecticut, has been dumped at approved sites in the Sound. But fishermen say it's driving their catch away and threatening their livelihood.
It basically displaces the fish from their natural habitat.
And environmentalists in both states say the dredge dumping is also harming water quality within the Long Island Sound. Joining us now is environmentalist Jordan Christensen with the Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, you've been long calling for this. Your reaction to the news that the governor and the state will be suing the EPA?
We're excited about this new development. So you're right, this has been a long battle. There was an agreement back in 2005 between Connecticut, New York, the EPA, and the Army Corps of Engineers that the EPA and Army Corps were going to slowly phase out the dumping of this dredge material, focus on beneficial reuse. And instead, the Army Corps and EPA have chosen to not go down that path, instead add an additional site in the eastern Long Island Sound. And we're happy that New York is fighting back.
Well, what changed? Because I remember that agreement. You know, we announced it. I was part of announcing it on Long Island at our station. And what changed that deal fell apart and then they decided to even add another site?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, the plan finally came out after 10 years of work where they were supposed to phase out dredge dumping. Instead, they came up with an entire list of all of these great beneficial reuse projects like restoring wetlands, refilling mines, reclaiming brownfields, habitat restoration.
Using this
dredge material like they were supposed to. However, in the plan, they chose to elevate the immediate short-term cost so that it's cheaper to just dump in the middle of Long Island Sound than to decontaminate this material and do these projects over the course of time.
So this is really just a money issue, that it's too expensive to do it the way they first decided they were going to do it, and now they're going for the cheaper alternative? Is that your take on it?
Well, part of it's a money issue, but more it's a short-term issue. So the Long Island Sound, you know, it's $17 to $36 billion a year for our area. We don't want to be contaminating it. And in the long term, it's actually the more cost-effective option to be using these reuse options. But the easier thing and the cheaper thing right now, being short-sighted, is to just dump it right back in the middle of the Sound.
Well, of course, now you have the EPA pushing back a little bit, saying that they've looked at this very carefully, just for years now, over a decade since that agreement was supposedly reached that fell apart, and that they have all the science to back up that there is no harm to the environment, that there's no harm to the water, or fish, or humans, not a significant amount of any contaminants being found in this dredge that will harm anyone.
Well, we actually know that when you dredge up some of this material, and this is what New York is fighting back for, you have things like heavy metals in there, pesticides, PCBs, organic matter that can lead to more nitrogen pollution in the Sound, which we've been, spending a lot of time and money to prevent.
Well, some of those things are not allowed anymore. So how would they be coming up in the dredge? Because they were there decades ago?
Of course, yeah, it's the legacy. These things have been in the ground along the shores. Now we're digging them up, dumping them in the middle of the Long Island Sound, and sort of just hoping that they stay where they're supposed to be staying. But unfortunately, it's right next to New York's waters, and waters move, so there's the potential for contamination. Yeah,
some people on the Cross Sound ferry there say that they see the dredge ships all the time. Kind of a shock as you're going across for your scenic tour of Connecticut.
Right.
But, you know, it's something we also have to do, though, because we're also having tremendous maritime traffic through the Long Island Sound and then up the eastern seaboard of Connecticut. Now, you got to admit, Connecticut's a very different animal than us. That's part of the reason why the dredge comes from them primarily. They have cities lining their seaboard with deep ports. We pretty much don't have anything like that. Active ports like they do in Connecticut.
Right, yeah, and we absolutely agree that they need to be doing dredging. It's critical for navigation. But our argument has always been that this is actually valuable material that we've been treating as waste, and that, you know, some of these might be smaller projects like wetlands restoration that New York is doing, but they're also huge projects. You have abandoned mines in Pennsylvania that are asking, you know, for lots of this waste, and instead of actually bartering or selling it, we're just choosing to dump possibly contaminated waste in the middle of the sound.
What would they do with it at an abandoned mine out west?
So they're supposed to refill them after, you know, as a health issue. So some of it might be, you know, these smaller habitat restoration projects, but they're also pretty large beneficial reuse projects. And Connecticut's in a really good position with the amount of sand and silt they have.
Yeah, and everybody wants to restore the wetlands, as the science has shown that we actually need them to protect against storms. Here we are in hurricane season dealing with Hurricane Harvey down in Texas. And but the question that pops up to me, and maybe it's just me, if this stuff is so bad, this dredge material, why would you want to put it in a wetlands area?
Well, we don't want it dumped in the middle of the sound either. If you're doing things like beneficial reuse, you test it, you decontaminate it, you make sure that it's suitable for reuse, and then you reuse it instead of just, you know, putting it on a barter, dumping it right back in the middle of the sound and doing this for the next 3 decades. Sounds
pretty expensive. I mean, it looks awful watching it like that. But that sounds pretty expensive, what you're proposing. Who would pay for that?
So it's over the course of 30 years, this plan, and it goes project by project. But the truth is, in terms of the ecological and the economic health of the sound over the course of 30 years, it's what we consider to be the much more sustainable option, since, you know, we are going to have to renourish these beaches. We are going to have to do these wetland restoration projects. In the long run, we should be doing it with this essentially free material now. And the last thing the state of Connecticut is saying is, look, it's not even in Long Island waters. It's on our side of the imaginary boundary line in the Long Island Sound, right? Are they right about that? It is on their side. It's technically on Connecticut's side, but I think that anyone who's ever been in the Sound knows that, you know, the water is moving. These materials certainly contaminate both sides, and New York waters don't know that technically they're supposed to be on the New York side. It's not like that's, okay, now I'm bathing in Connecticut water. Oh, here's some Long Island. You're right. That's certainly true. But this is a legal battle that has now been joined by Governor Andrew Cuomo, New York State Governor. Yes, the EPA will be following it to see what happens. Jordan Christensen, with the Citizens Campaign for the Environment, will be watching as well. Thank you.